This comparative analysis aims to analyze the technical elements of two films, Stanley Kubrick's 1987 Full Metal Jacket and Spike Lee's 2020 Da 5 Bloods. Both of these films will be analyzed through the social cultural context and more specifically comparing the ways that each director portrays the psychological effects of war and the loss of individuality. As Donald M. Goldstein states, the Vietnam War was arguably the most traumatic experience for the United States in the 20th century. In essence, the Vietnam War was one that was extremely divisive and led to the loss of support towards the Vietnam War. In a quote by philosopher Marshall McLuhan, television brought the brutality of war into the comfort of the living room. Vietnam was lost in the living rooms of America, not on the battlefields of Vietnam. The application of Vietnam War film conventions are seen in Full Metal Jacket and Da 5 Bloods. These films adhere to the genre of war films and in specific Vietnam War films as they both represent the events unfolding from the war and the post-war effects. Although both directors originate from the United States, Full Metal Jacket encompasses a 1980s perspective, while Da 5 Bloods encompasses a 2020 perspective. Therefore, both of these films are valid examples for this comparison, as it proves the apparent universal understanding that war, and specifically the Vietnam War, deteriorates the mental stability of those involved through the cinematic techniques of lighting, camera angles, and mise-en-scène. As both of these directors created a focus on the social unrest and the social effects of the war through cinematic techniques, these films will help answer the question, how did the war film genre influence the making of Vietnam films such as Full Metal Jacket and Da 5 Bloods? Full Metal Jacket is a 1987 film about the dehumanizing effects of the Vietnam War on the U.S. Marines from boot camp until fighting through Vietnam streets. It mainly follows the actions of a Marine, nicknamed Private Joker, as he first suffers a loss of individuality in boot camp and is then sent to be a photojournalist stationed in Vietnam. Stanley Kubrick, an American director, filmed the movie from 1985 to 86, which was 10 years following the end of the Vietnam War. Therefore, the social unrest and the effect of the Vietnam War was still present throughout the film's creation. In an interview with the Los Angeles Times, Kubrick states that Vietnam was such a phony war, encouraging men to falsify a body count or at least total up the blood trails on the superstition that would lead to bodies. Therefore, Kubrick aims to present the Vietnam War in a negative, degradative manner. On the other hand, Da 5 Bloods is a 2020 film which similarly talks about the dehumanizing effects of the Vietnam War, but includes a focus on the African American community. It follows a group of African American Vietnam veterans who travel back into the fighting grounds of Vietnam to recover lost gold and bring home one of their platoon members who died and was buried during the war. They name themselves the Bloods. As they face resistance from the native Vietnamese citizens, Spike Lee is able to show how the war disproportionately affected the African American community and how the troubles of the war still reap on the veterans even after 35 years. Especially as this film was released during a spike in 21st century United States civil rights movement titled Black Lives Matter, Spike Lee states in an interview with NPR, "The fact is that the majority of films that dealt with Vietnam, the black experience was not part of the story. Therefore, there's a focus on black community while still highlighting how the war stripped the mental stability of its soldiers." Both of these films are highly relevant to the topic of the video essay as they follow conventions of war films. Soldiers fighting in inhumane conditions, male bonding buddy adventures, and most importantly, the effect of war on its soldiers. The films allow for a direct connection of the film genre of Vietnam War films through the different cultures of origin, the United States 1980s and United States in 2020. Through the realistic portrayal of the events unfolding in the Vietnam War, Full Metal Jacket and Da 5 Bloods is able to present the downfall of American soldiers during and following the Vietnam War. These two films use lighting, camera angles, and mise-en-scène to portray the negative effects of the war. Beginning with lighting, there are two aspects that play a monumental role in its use. These are lighting color and the use of chiaroscuro. In Full Metal Jacket, the use of blue-colored lighting is especially emphasized in the barracks after the artificial light is turned off. This use of natural lighting therefore shows that the men are being stripped of all individuality until they are all natural-born men. Chiaroscuro in Full Metal Jacket is mainly shown in the scene where Private Powell is in the restroom at night. In this scene, he ends up killing himself and his senior drill instructor. There is harsh lighting that seeps in through the window and leaves dark, shadowy eye sockets to cover Powell's face. This represents Powell's struggle between good and evil, and it emphasizes the notion that even just a military training will lead a soldier to have misconceptions of who they are. Additionally, without the use of fill light and a focus on Rembrandt lighting to illuminate only one side of Powell's face, it shows him in a half-light, half-dark manner. This is also representative of the mental battle that is placed upon the soldiers of war. On the other hand, the blue light in The Five Bloods is used to show the afterhand effects of the Vietnam War. In one of the incipient scenes, the Bloods are shown to dance in a club. In this club, the pink light highlights the undertones of blue reflecting off of the soldiers' clothes. This shows that although these soldiers have already been sent home and are no longer fighting a war in Vietnam, they still feel moods of vulnerability and distrust. This helps foreshadow the Vietnamese resistance later in the movie. This is juxtaposed to Full Metal Jacket, where the soldiers' vulnerability is forced upon them during their basic training. The chiaroscuro in The Five Bloods is shown mainly when Norman is talking to the rest of the Bloods in a crashed plane. He and the rest of the men are covered in deep shadow where it seems like the only illumination is from the gold bars. This therefore is a representation of the oppression of the African American community and the emotional detachment from their true selves when coming to war. Norman compares the war to the same restrictions and control that were present during the time period of slavery. As the blue light was used in nighttime, it shows the vulnerability of soldiers in the war, since nighttime is when people are most susceptible to attack, and thus it highlights the psychological toll that the darkness of war can have. Additionally, in films, the blue color and tint of scenes symbolize isolation, passivity, and calmness. Kubrick and Lee therefore were both attempting to visualize the effect of the war on soldiers and represent that when fighting in the war, there is both a war physically but also mentally. The blue acts as a middle ground between light and dark, but on a deeper level, sanity and insanity. This connects to the cultural context as it speaks about the psychological trauma that the soldiers receive from war in the nighttime. The next method in which Lee and Kubrick utilizes cinematic techniques is through camera angles. In specific to Full Metal Jacket, Kubrick uses point-of-view angles to show a loss of individualism. In the first scenes, the senior drill instructor yells at the soldiers, and in this way, it shows that he is in control and will decide the everyday activities of each soldier. This immediately starts the film with the idea that the soldiers will no longer have a sense of individualism. The same is shown when Marines look down at dead bodies that they encounter. The camera angle is initially shown at a knee-level shot, but then transitions to a low-angle shot, and both scenes lead to the idea that the soldiers are constantly faced with death and can at any time be in a grave. This leads to psychological damage to the soldiers. The point-of-view angles are similarly used in The Five Bloods as well. Especially seen in the point of view of the kid asking for money in the restaurant scene, the kid is shown from a position of power over the Bloods. The kid is then able to trigger their PTSD later on in the scene. This shows that although the Bloods are back in the country to simply acquire the gold, they are still seen as the enemy and visitors to the country. There is another low angle in the scene where the Bloods find Norman buried in the ground. As opposed to showing the Bloods that they could be killed in the war, like Full Metal Jacket, Lee is able to represent how the soldiers are now in a position of power and they have found out who they truly are. However, since they all but one die at the end of the film, they have truly lost themselves in the Vietnam War. One of the aspects that Kubrick did not utilize was a soliloquy where Lee's character, Paul, speaks directly to the camera and breaks the fourth wall. In this way, he shows that the war is a never-ending war for those involved, seeing as they still continuously fight the psychological effects of war, and the only comfort they rely upon is those who understand their pain. By breaking the fourth wall, Lee wanted to personally connect to each audience member that the psychological war never ends. In Full Metal Jacket, the point of view showed the soldiers as losing themselves and their individuality, while the point of views in The Five Bloods are from a position of regaining power and retrieving their individuality back. The third technique is the use of mise-en-scène. The mise-en-scène in the Full Metal Jacket helps delineate the loss of individuality. In the opening scenes of the film, the director shows all the soldiers getting their hair shaved off. This aspect of war films is adequately shown as hair being shaved off is a common symbol in military films. This shows that the soldiers are all mixed together in the war and they are no longer an individual. The use of mise-en-scène in The Five Bloods is differently shown since it shows the everlasting presence of Vietnam in the Bloods. In the flashback scenes, all the African American soldiers have the same uniform without trinkets, and it's especially contrasted to Joker, who has the peace button on his chest. In addition, all the soldiers have personalized helmets with the words written on their helmets in Full Metal Jacket. This emphasizes the lack of individualism in The Five Bloods and also the psychological effects of being in the war. Although in Full Metal Jacket they were able to personalize themselves, it was a cover-up for their lack of individualism being stripped from them during training. Later in the film, the statue of Buddha in the background of David in the final scenes is similar to the Jesus poster found in the Full Metal Jacket. It shows a false sense of security to the soldiers that even a higher power cannot save them from the war's psychological effects. It is clear that both films belong to the Vietnam War film genre and insinuate back to the social cultural context. Although the films were released 33 years apart from each other, many aspects of the perspective of the Vietnam War does not change. There still remains a combination of ideals between the 1980s and the 2020s perspective. The use of lighting with color and chiaroscuro camera angles with the use of point of views and low angles, and the mise-en-scène with specifics to subtle background elements, Stanley Kubrick and Spike Lee were able to properly show the perspective that the Vietnam War leads to the deterioration of its soldiers and causes a loss of individuality.